We're off.
All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our 8th episode of Edge Voice. I'm just going to greet you all as you come in. It's about 3:59 p.m. and we're scheduled to start at 4. So we'll just give people a couple of minutes to join. Thank you all for joining us. Just a couple of things to say before we get started. The session is being recorded. I'll remind you again later on. And just a quick reminder, don't click any links in the chat box that are not sent by the host, that's me, or our panelist or moderator. So again, you don't know who is sending those links, so do not click any of those links. While we wait to get started, I'd like to know a little bit about our audience. So we're going to be talking about academic English today, and I'd like to know about your experience at your school and with academic English. So can you let me know your role? You can type this in the chat box. Are you a teacher or an administrator, or are you a student? And what kind of school do you work at? So you might be a university lecturer, or you might be a primary school teacher or a secondary school teacher. I'd love to get to know the audience a little bit more and see who we have with us today. So we have Bethan from RMIT. That's fantastic. I'm just going to go ahead and turn on the transcript as well, because sometimes that's useful for the audience. I need to find out how to do that first. I might do that in a minute. Okay, so Gary is from Thailand and teaching secondary English. Fantastic. Van Lang University. I was just there the other day, so it's great to see you again. English Centers, EEC, some more from Vietnam. Oh, I'm so sorry if I say your name wrong. Marikris, I hope that's right, saying, how is everyone? I'm fantastic today. Great, so it's really nice to see a lot of people here. You can keep letting us know your thoughts and your questions in the chat box. There is also a Q&A feature. If you want to ask the panelists questions, you can do that in the chat box or with the Q&A feature. We will get to those at the end. Without further ado, I'd like to get our session started and our conversation started today. So just as a reminder, one more time, our session is being recorded, and don't click on any hyperlinks that are in the chat box that are not sent by our host or panelist or moderator. As you know, this is a webinar from National Geographic Learning. At National Geographic Learning, it's our mission to bring the world to the classroom and bring the classroom to life. I really tried to do that for you all today. We have our guest all the way from Boston, so we have people from all over the world today. And when it comes to bringing the classroom to life, I wanted to share real stories from the classroom with you. That's why we have our guest here from RMIT in Vietnam to join us and talk about academic English in the classroom. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. And I'd like to introduce our 2 guests. Actually, I'll let them introduce themselves. So our first guest is Ed Brown, Curriculum Coordinator at RMIT. So Ed, could you please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone, welcome. Yeah, my name is Ed Brown, and I'm the Curriculum Development Coordinator for RMIT's School of English and University Pathways. I've been teaching here academic English at this university for about 7 years, a little bit over maybe. And as well as teaching academic English to our pathway students, I am responsible for the oversight of curricular development of curricular elements, and any changes that are needed, exploring ways to implement them to meet the needs of our students. Nice to be here, thanks.
So I hope that you have a lot of really insightful, valuable things from the classroom and from your experience with real students to share with us. Our next guest is Laura Le Dréan, Executive Editor with National Geographic Learning, all the way from Boston, joining us from Boston this morning. And I just have a more specific question. When I think about an editor, I think about, checking grammar and punctuation, but I'm sure that you do much more than that, Laura. So could you please introduce yourself and let us know what it is that you do here at National Geographic Learning, please?
Sure, Andy. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in this EduVoice webinar here. My name is Laura Le Dréan. I'm currently the executive editor at National Geographic Learning. I'm responsible for the academic skills titles and the professional development titles. I have been working with English language teaching my entire career, starting with over 20 years in the classroom and then many years in publishing. I manage a team of editors and who work on the development of our series, our academic series. And my day-to-day includes actual editing. Yes, I do check for commas and things like that, but more often just sort of problem solving, research, making sure that we are creating materials that meet the needs of students and teachers all over the world. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So I'd like to get into a deep dive into our conversation about academic English. And I want to first start off by kind of framing what is academic English and why it might be important. So I guess from Laura, my first question is for you as an editor and materials and program developer, kind of what are the main goals of academic English program from your point of view?
Well, I think, sort of simply put, it is to prepare students with the skills and competencies they need in an academic program. These are language skills, vocabulary, grammar, problem solving, media literacy, and self-directed learning. But it's also really important, and I think more and more so in today's world, to connect students to skills that they're going to be able to use in their future lives, in the workplace, and in their lives. And so we want to instill lifelong learning in students. We want to be sure we prepare them with future-ready skills so that they really are set to enter the workforce, or to do whatever they want to do with their lives. We want to leave them with a curiosity for learning and make sure that they really instill in them this motivation to continue learning in their lives.
Great. And how about Ed? Does that resonate with you? Do you have any other goals or any different ideas about what academic English means?
I think Laura's hit the nail on the head there, really. I mean, sort of preparing some notes, I sort of came upon a lot of similar things in terms of those kind of skills, the emotional, social intelligence skills, the independent learning habits, alongside the language input that the courses may deliver. Those sort of starter kind of competencies are equally important, I think, for students to succeed in, like Laura said, both academia, but also in the world outside of that as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we kind of have two timelines that we're talking about. One is in our students' careers, their academic careers at university, and then we're talking about their lives outside of university, their professional lives. I'd like to focus a little bit more on their time at university at this moment. So Ed, can you give us some idea or any kind of success stories about what academic English has helped your students with?
Yeah, I think that a nice example here is our contribution to the AAS, Australian Award Scholarship Program, where we bring students who have received a scholarship to go and study abroad in Australia into our pathway, and we bring them in at any level, sometimes as low as elementary, all the way up to our advanced level before they go on to do an IELTS exam before going to study in Australia. And those students who come through our pathway, they really they build their skills, they build their language competencies, their confidence to go and operate in a immersive context, learning speaking English and studying higher ed, and frequently being very successful. I think we've had something like 700 students since it started in 2012 who have gone through the program and then gone on to study in Australia, which is fantastic. And one in particular recently, I'm still in touch with a few of them, and one in particular posted her transcript on Facebook the other week saying she got a distinction in her MA in economics, which was fantastic. Wow. So to be a English as a second language speaker in Australia and able to sort of achieve those levels of academic competence is a huge achievement, I think. And that's just one example, that she's not alone there. A lot of them do become very successful in that regard. Yeah.
That's a really, really awesome success story, and distinction, I know, is very, very difficult to get. So congratulations to that student as well. And I guess to your program, has set the foundation for that student's success. So that is really awesome to hear. I like how this has described how academic English helped them, not just speak English and operate in day-to-day lives, but also achieve high things in another area of study, like economics. So I wonder if there's like a minimum level that our students need to be at in order to study academic English. So if we want them to study economics in English, do they need a lot of background knowledge in other subjects? Do they need a minimum level of English to kind of get these success rates or these kinds of success stories that you are talking about?
I think if you're talking about after they've finished English and they're now in the academic subject, I think there's definitely a level of competence required for them to participate in the discourse around that field, and be taken seriously. I think in terms of the pathway that leads up to it, I think that there's room there for a lot of mistakes to be made and lessons to be learned through those mistakes, and development of those skills. But I think once they get to immerse in the academic field, they would need a certain level of general English competence that allows them to participate sort of flexibly in general conversations. But then when they need to get down to an assignment, they need to know the right language to use for that field of study, and they can't informal formal language, for example, and that does come with a higher level of competency, I think.
Sure.
But Andy, is your question, what level do they need? Do they need a minimum level to begin their academic study? Was that also part of your question? Yeah,
that's one part of it. Do you have an idea on that?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think they probably need to be literate. I'm not really aware of any academic programs that teach literacy in general, but most academic programs that are out, at least publisher programs, they claim to be, they start at an A1 level, but it's actually, we try very hard to control the language and the vocabulary at that level, but it's actually it's difficult in an academic environment, because you want to be introducing them to topics that are somewhat academic, and those topics generally involve a vocabulary that is a little bit more advanced than your typical A1 vocabulary. So it's challenging, but we think it can be done. And if I could just quickly show a sample of something that we do to show bringing the level down, is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
Yeah, I'm going to be sharing my screen really quickly here. So here you can see, hopefully, this is an example of content that is meant to be for an A1 student. It's actually called Gen Z and Millennials Dream Jobs. And we're trying to get students content that students can relate to, but it's actually very simple. Compare the lists, which jobs are on both lists, which are not. And then we basically are asking the students, to look at the list of Gen Z jobs and millennial jobs, compare the list, and then talk about which ones they might be interested in themselves. Very, very simple and controlled language, but this helps students start being able to handle academic content. Or here's another one, again, look how easy this is. talking about the interests and job surveys. I am a doer, what I do, what I play, what I like to do, and getting students to think, I think an engineer is a thinker. Yes, and an engineer is a doer too. So very controlled language, but getting them to think about the kinds of skills and mindsets that are required in these different jobs.
I see. So I think my takeaway from what you just described here is that they need some sort of literacy skills, existing literacy skills. Is that what you mean?
Oh, yes, I don't think, most of the academic programs I know do not teach them how to write, for example. But I don't know, Ed, are you aware of anything that does, any academic programs where they're coming in and you're teaching them the alphabet?
Absolutely not. I think the literacy in one language definitely will transfer over to the language being learnt. It sort of sets a foundation, having sort of developed certain intelligences or intelligent sort of competencies will sort of allow them to do so in the new language for sure.
But certainly a student at the beginning level can start in an academic program, is my point.
Right, I see. Okay, so just those basic literacy skills are what's needed, and they don't need to be afraid of what might be considered academic vocabulary. Excellent. That's really great to hear, because I love low entry barriers, to these kinds of programs. So if, as long as you can have the phonics knowledge and read, you could.
And one thing we have to be really sure is that just because they're at a low language level does not mean that they can't think, that they are not critical thinkers. And they also bring a wealth of knowledge from their own language, from their life, their world experiences. So we have to respect that they're bringing that to the table and help them, transfer what they know into the new language.
Absolutely. Great. So we talked about some existing kind of skills that they need at the beginning and how that helps them in their whole university study. I'd like to now talk about what happens after university to set the foundation about why it might be so important. So I'd like to know, what are some academic skills that maybe you learned in school that you're still using in your professional work today? I'll ask Laura first, please.
Okay. Well, I went to school a long time ago, guys, but I hope I use a lot of those skills. And when I think of the academic skills that are important to me, reading and writing are sort of foundational. I really respect people. Well, I think reading, you learn so much by reading. And in terms of language, it's an excellent way to build your vocabulary, to build your knowledge, to build your understanding of grammar, but also your understanding of the world. And then, of course, critical thinking, being able to think logically and being able to solve problems. Those are really important. Obviously, skills like resilience and flexibility are super important as well. But yes, I hope that I'm drawing on those skills that I learned in university many years ago.
Absolutely.
And combining those two, sorry, Andy. So combining the reading literacy with that criticality to question what you're reading and consider where you might look to sort of confirm it, or
especially today, in today's world of so much media coming at you, that you have to be able to evaluate it. Yes.
Yeah. I think something else that I learned as well was the sort of the need to modify if I was writing, for example, or having a talk, to modify my sort of my voice depending on what I was writing. If I was writing an assignment, I'd have a very different writing voice to sort of other lower stakes activities, for example, lower stakes tasks.
Yeah, learning the appropriate register, right?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. And knowing which ones to apply to the different situations, I think has helped.
But I think, Andy, that's a really good question, because one thing we would like our students to take away is that the skills they are learning, that they're relevant, that they're things that they can use in their lives forever. It's not just sort of slogging through academic materials in the classroom, but it's to help them for their whole entire lives. Yeah.
I love that idea. Yeah, right. I think that gets skipped over a lot for students who may be focused on the here and now. Like, I just need to finish this class. I just need to graduate, and they're setting the goal that at the end of 4 years. So it's a really lovely reminder that it's going to last, quite some time, for the rest of their lives. And as we know, like the future is really unpredictable, which is, the rest of their lives. Do you have any indication about like what skills might be useful for the next 10 or 15 years in the future? Anything that might be kind of new now? I'll start with maybe Ed. Have you found anything like that?
I think a lot of the skills we just sort of mentioned in the skills we learned that were important to us, I think a lot of those will carry on through. And in terms of that criticality, Laura said, especially now when I mentioned that criticality, because, you've got so many sources these days of information coming from everywhere that it's going to be even more and more important to look at it with a critical eye and to be able to kind of discern it, possibly from the language, whether or not it's credible or not, or whether it's believable, or whether or not actually this is something that is worth exploring more. And given that people can put information out there so much more easily, and probably will be able to more going forward, I think it's going to be increasingly important just to really sort of pin down those critical thinking skills when, excuse me, when considering the ideas that you're reading and people are putting out there.
And that
AI as well,
artificial intelligence is putting out there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True. I wonder something that maybe is a wide-ranging topic. I don't think we have the scope or time to discuss it today, but I think there are a lot of people have an ability to automatically tell when something is generated by AI. At least I can, and it's so hard to describe how I know. So I wonder if that will be a hot topic in academic English in the future. Any ideas on that or indication on that, Laura?
Well, that's a really hot topic. You're right. And we are just now discussing at National Geographic Learning how we start talking about AI and helping teachers and students basically use this new tool, because it's a tool. It's like the calculator was, many years ago, and we can't ignore it. And we have to figure out the right way to talk about it and encourage and find strategies for teachers and students to use to help them basically use the tool to improve their skills. So yes, it's a very important topic, but it's so new. We're all just sort of trying to figure it out right now.
And how to use it as a tool and the ways of doing that, rather than, using it for less honest purposes, let's say,
Exactly. Yeah.
Cheating. Yeah, right, for sure. Okay, so again, we could like have a huge discussion on that for a long time, but I'd like to stick more with the realities of teaching academic English today in our classrooms. So just to summarize our conversation up to now, we've talked about how it's important for students in the classroom, in their not only their English language study, but also the other subjects that they study at university. And of course, it's a lot of skills that they're going to be using in the rest of their lives. I'd like to go now to teaching academic English. And my first question is for Ed. Which areas in academic English do you find that maybe students need the most support with, in your classrooms?
That's interesting. I think it's often receptive skills in terms of doing a bit more than just comprehension questions for a listening or reading activity. I feel like sometimes they can answer the comprehension questions, no problem. But if you ask some sort of deeper questions or questions that address deeper understanding of a text, whether it's listening or reading, they can struggle. And so I think actually teachers could benefit from spending a bit more time on those sort of deeper understanding activities that address the real academic aspects of a text, so that they're able to kind of get some takeaways from it and take it into a productive discussion. So rather than saying, have you answered the questions? Yes, great, let's move on. I think being able to demonstrate their abilities of criticality. What were the most interesting things to you in that listening we just heard? Why? What was surprising? Can you summarize the opinions of the author? That questions like this that address students' understanding and give some information to the teacher about that understanding, that allows them to really kind of monitor their development of those kind of skills, I think is really important.
So support with critical thinking. And is there anything that we can do for teachers to help them? I get questions a lot like, how do I teach critical thinking? And for me, it's not a very straightforward question. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you know or that you've done to help teachers push their students to think critically.
I mean, if there was a magic bullet for teaching critical thinking, that would be lovely. But of course, I think just breaking it down to simple and regular opportunities to for students to give their opinions about things. So reflecting on their own opinion, perhaps before they read or listen to something, considering whether their opinion has been changed or differs in any way, having been exposed to a reading or a listening, and considering those ideas and asking themselves whether or not those opinions are developing and growing and becoming more something they could articulate in a productive task would be really helpful for the students.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's so important to give them, opportunities to share. And as you mentioned, you're right. Sometimes we get so bogged down with the course schedule. It's like, let's finish the comprehension questions and go to the next activity. So I like that that idea of helping teachers just focus on, give them that opportunity. Don't just zoom through the book. Thank you for that. Laura, I have sort of a related question. From your point of view, what is something that you do as an editor and materials developer to help students with critical thinking or other academic skills?
Well, that's where I spend a lot of my thinking is trying to figure out the best way to help students learn and practice these important skills. I think for me, I've often heard that teaching writing is very difficult, and learning writing, of course, is very hard because it involves grammar and vocabulary and sentence structure, and then having ideas and organizing ideas. And so I think that writing, I would say, I agree with Ed that we need to do more with making sure that students are really understanding input, whether it's reading or listening, and being able to think critically about it and to figure out how it applies to their lives or how it applies to another situation. So it's basically this application of knowledge. Critical thinking, I just want to tell you, recently I was talking to a professor at a very, very elite school here in the United States in the Boston area. And he told me that, and these students, it's not easy to get into this program. And he said that the most important thing that he teaches, and he was an economics teacher, is teaching them how to think critically. So I'm starting to think that thinking critically is something that comes with experience, with life, experiences. You start to realize, well, I've got to stop, I've got to reflect, I've got to see. And that is not something that is easy to sort of teach in a class. You have to just instill those kinds of mind or those kinds of habits in students, and then hope that it starts to catch, and that students then say, oh yeah, now I see, now I can see the importance of this, stopping and reflecting on something and saying what are the implications, how can I use it in a different way, and how can I question it. So we do a lot with critical thinking, but it is not, I'm never sure how effective our materials are, to be honest. And that's where I need to ask customers and students how effective it is in teaching those critical thinking skills. That was a long answer I don't know that I answered your question, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So my takeaway from that is, if we want to help students with critical thinking, instill these habits into them. It's not one day like, oh, now you've learned critical thinking after the one lesson.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you're not sure if these things that you're doing are effective, and we want to talk with teachers who are using it. So now I'd like to hear from Ed. What are the topics or the methods that are actually engaging to students, or you get the most, which things resonate with most students?
I think obviously engaging in relatable topics are going to sort of meet them on their level a bit more than something which is a bit too highbrow or too far removed from their sort of reality. So I think just, sorry, I don't mean to plug, but we recently moved over to the Reflect book for the Nat Geo Reflect, the Cengage Reflect book. And in the topics in there is a lot of content in there which is sort of within the realm of the students' understanding of, you know, this region and their world. And so giving them topics that they can actually relate to and applying academic activities to those topics that are within their reach, either conceptually or intellectually, is going to engage them a lot more. So rather than a topic about something they have no interest in or no understanding of or no prior knowledge of, bringing those topics that are a bit closer to home to them, I think, is really important. And so I was really pleased to see something like the Reflect book come out, where actually we've got students in Vietnam. We've got a lot of content in there which is from the region, from Vietnam, Singapore, like Halong Bay as well, places like that, where the students can say, oh, I know that, I have something to say about that. And it just makes it immediately more accessible to them. So they're going to immediately become more engaged with it. And then the thing that might sort of not undermine that, but is if the level of expectation of the academic activity is too high, then that might disengage them again. So you've got to kind of keep those academic activities within their reach as well. So things like critical thinking activities, not to teach it, but just to give them something to question and to think about, whether they thought about it before or not, doesn't matter, but give them something to think about on the topic that is in an area which is familiar to them, I think is crucial.
That's great. I really agree with that. So things that they can relate to. So my question for Laura then is, when you're developing these sort of programs, how do you know what these topics are that are, you know, how do you choose these topics?
That's $1 million question. Yeah, and I actually worked on the Reflect series, and one of the major goals of that series was two things, actually. One was to choose content that students could relate to try to meet students where they are. And this is super important. As Ed says, if students are not interested in the content, they're not going to learn anything. They're going to turn off. So you have to find content that they can connect to in some way. So there's that. And then the other thing about the Reflect series we tried very hard is to help students develop confidence. And so again, as Ed said, if you make the expectations too hard, they're going to feel frustrated and defeated. And we wanted to give them lots of moments to experience success so that they would build their confidence and see, oh gosh, I can do this. It's not that hard. I can do it, and give them a feeling of accomplishment and achievement. So those are really important things. Again, I'm going to just quickly share, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. And I'm not trying to sell anything, but because these were the so here is something from I'm sorry, I got the wrong view here. This is from another series that we're developing, but here's career values. And again, presumably this is you know at National Geographic Learning we love photography, so this is an interesting job. Probably none of you have a job like this, which is cleaning the goats in a museum. But here, if I go to the next slide, oh, sorry, here, I wanted to, well, I don't know if you can see that, but determine your career values. So these are things like the ability to move up, the ability to be your own boss, change and variety, creativity. I don't know about you, but when I was in college, nobody ever asked me, what do you value? And to start thinking about what's going to be important to you in your work life. And so I really like this approach of helping students to see what's important to them and to think critically about what kind of person they are and what will be important to them. Here's another one. This is for a low level, and creativity is one of the most important future-ready skills, according to the World Economic Forum. And so we want to help students to see the importance of thinking creatively. And you can see how simple this is. This is for a low-level student. You know, when ways to think creatively. Next time you're trying to think of a new idea, try one of these strategies, write it down, think like a genius, think of a bad idea. So trying to give them concrete little things that they can do to think creatively. this is not high level, but it's, again, instilling at a very low level what thinking creatively involves. And then here's another one, which, in terms of content that's relatable, everybody's afraid of something. So this is something that students can relate to. What are the various fears that are the most common? Is it fear of public speaking or fear of snakes and alligators and things like that? So I just wanted to share some of the way we try to bring really relevant, easy to associate with content into our programs. Oh, am I sharing?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, I want to stop sharing now. Oh, here's one more. I just want to show you. This is from this is actually from Reflect, and no, actually, no, I'm sorry, it's from a new program. But this is to show in a visual way something that we really value a lot is, teaching visual literacy and teaching students how to read graphics, because so much information we get today is in graphic form. It's not just text. And so this shows, in a nice visual way how we got to the cell phone of today, which is an interesting history lesson. I'll stop there. If I can stop my share, I don't know how to stop it. Can you stop it for me?
I think you touched on something there, Laura, as well, about the opportunity for personalization to engage learners as well.
Thank you, Andy, for controlling me there.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, Ed, to interrupt you. Did you want to share anything on visualization?
No, but I was just going to say, sort of outside of any textbook, I think something that can engage learners as well. Laura touched on it with personalization, but outside of the book, I think as well is maybe give them plenty of opportunities sort of for reflection. So build into a course some goal setting perhaps at the start that allows them to sort of situate themselves as a learner, as a person, they put who they are, both in and out of the classroom, giving them plenty of opportunities to reflect on those goals, on their progress, on their development throughout the course, just to help them sort of see their own progress as they're developing and their confidence develop throughout their learning journey.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for that. Still on this topic of relatable topics. Personally, I think that what we've just looked at is relatable to everyone. Everyone's afraid of something, or everyone has a job that they do or that they will do. Still, I hear from teachers that they say, oh, my students don't relate to this topic. So I wonder from your perspective as a teacher and curriculum coordinator, what can teachers do when their students say, I don't relate to that?
I suppose knowledge of their students would allow them to try to find a way to either bring in an alternative sort of concept that is related to or enables the learning outcomes, but addresses their students on a personal level would be helpful, but very difficult, perhaps, I would say. You've got the curriculum to keep to, you've got outcomes to meet, you've got exams to deliver throughout the course, perhaps, or at the end of the course. So there is content that you're going to need to get through. But at the same time, if you have knowledge of your students that allows you to sort of personalize it for some of your students, if you know students are into something rather than something in the book, you might be able to give it a slightly different spin to bring it into their realm of knowledge and interest. But I think it's challenging for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's just so many different students with different interests. So it's almost like, oh, do I need to do that every single lesson? And hopefully not. But on that topic, maybe we're talking about motivating students with topics that are relevant to them. Are there any other ways that you motivate your students?
I think
or the teachers in your program, you could share
sure.
on their behalf as well.
I think approaches to feedback are helpful. Like if you're given sort of clear feedback, easy to understand, that the students can sort of see their progress. So if you're given consistent feedback throughout the course about the same kind of areas, then students are better able to sort of track their improvement in those areas, whether it's pronunciation, whether it's organizing their writing or organizing their sort of talks that they might give in, say, for example, end of unit tasks and things. If you have a clear, consistent way of giving feedback to tasks like that, it's more helpful for the students, I think, to monitor their own development, but also be motivated by seeing that development progress. And so I think feedback is also a really important thing. And that doesn't have to just be with unit tasks. It could be day-to-day activities. So like at RMIT, we try to give our teachers the time to really focus on students' needs with formative teaching and learning, so that there's a learning cycle that we apply to any activity, whether it's a grammar point or a little summary or a larger unit task. And we've made a conscious effort to reduce teacher workload to make that a reality in the classroom on a day-to-day. So rather than marking lots and lots of assignments all the time, teachers actually do have the time to focus on students' needs. And just students seeing their teacher's knowledge of them as a human being, I think, is also a big motivating factor. So rather than just marking their writing, knowing who they are and being able to sort of adjust to the needs of those individuals as individuals is also motivating for the students.
Awesome. I love that the thing that you just shared about trying to reduce the teacher's workload. And for me, that's not just, making their job faster and easier, but really giving them more time to focus on their students and developing the personal relationships with them there. That's what's really going to be effective. I want to piggyback still on the topic of feedback, and my question is for Laura now. As you're developing a course or a unit, do you have any sort of plan or method, like what is the best time to give feedback or way to give feedback?
When we do in our teacher materials have suggestions for teachers, and especially in terms of when they should do formative assessment, which activities lend themselves to formative assessment. We provide rubrics for evaluating writing and speaking assignments. And I think I really appreciate what Ed said about making, trying to individualize the feedback a little bit. I know that one of the things I always liked about teaching writing, is teaching writing really allows you to get to know a student. And when you spend the time not just correcting their grammar errors or their spelling errors, but really commenting on their content and saying, well, that's really an interesting perspective, or that must have been an exciting experience, or whatever, it allows you to sort of give feedback that's more personal. And you can do that obviously with the speaking too, with the presentation that they do. So anytime a student is doing some sort of a task, trying to personalize that feedback, I think is a really is a very positive way to handle that aspect of the teaching process.
Go ahead.
No, that's pretty much what I was going to say.
So you mentioned that there are like rubrics for speaking and writing, which make it easier for students and teachers to understand what's expected out of that task or that work. Are there any like kind of rubrics or ways to understand how well a particular academic skill is being used? Is there a critical thinking rubric or a research rubric?
I don't know, but I'm going to start thinking about critical thinking rubric now. Now you've got me a task for myself to do today, to develop a critical thinking rubric. Now that's a good idea. No, I don't know of anything like that off the top of my head. But I think, the rubrics generally include, did the presenter, for example, pause appropriately, using certain presentation skills? Did the presenter pronounce the ES ending correctly? So we do mention specific skills taught in the rubric of each unit. Yeah.
Okay, I see. So I guess the critical thinking rubric is a bit wide in scope.
So
But
it's a good,
yeah.
it's an interesting topic, Andy.
Yeah.
I'm going to think about it.
That's great. But yeah, like a good presentation, academic presentation should have these sorts of things. So
Elements, yes.
that's all
And that's,
included
yeah.
in the materials for teachers.
Does your paragraph have a topic sentence? You know, that's something we've taught. So presumably you're checking whether the skills have been addressed or have been mastered.
Sure.
Not mastered, master is the wrong word, but have they
just
been learned?
Sorry, Laura. I would just add to that that the scores in other areas of an achievement criteria or a rubric would sort of be higher probably if a student does demonstrate higher levels of critical thinking. The way they approach the task, the way they break down the task and then break down their response accordingly. I think you're going to get a more organized response to say an essay prompt, for example, if a student has more critical thinking around that topic and is able to kind of break it down for the reader and make it easier to read, more coherent. And I think so rather than critical thinking being assessed as an isolated feature, I think it would actually feed into improved scores in all those other areas.
I think you're absolutely right, Ed. That's a great observation. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Excellent. I think maybe we've just talked on that, but I have spoken to some teachers before that's like, I don't know whether to focus on the academic skill or the grammar. So Ed, like in your experience as both a teacher and as someone who's working on the course, what would you say to those teachers who are in that space? I don't know what to focus on.
Sorry, in terms of.
So let's say there's a unit and it's a particular skill, like an academic skill, but then also there's a grammar point that's taught along with it. And they're kind of confused because maybe the students need a lot of help with both of those things and they don't know what to do.
Sure, I think that's really a difficult question. Thank you. But I would say that I think initially, giving some input on the grammar, I think perhaps in a simple way, just to help get them get them comfortable with the structure and how it's used. So the sort of the meaning, the form, the use of the structure, and then see it in context. So a good reading, sort of recognizing the structure in context, asking questions about it. So, you know, where does certain features of the structure appear, in what order, before then giving them an opportunity to apply it in a kind of more controlled way. Maybe trying to draw attention to the kind of aha moments where it's like, oh, so this is how it can be used. This is how it can relate to the goals for the end of the week in terms of, there's often functional language that helps with the unit task, right? So it could be, you know, language of comparison, for example, or language for cause and effect for a related unit task. And so I think breaking it down for them into simple chunks that then build up to, oh, this is going to really help me to do something more extensive in the form of this unit task or even this unit review test or this end of course test. So helping them just sort of connect the dots gradually. But I don't think it's feasible to just jump right in there, but I also don't think it's feasible to just do the grammar in isolation and not have time to then use it. It's kind of, well, we've learned the present perfect, for example, and now let's move on to unit 2. Without that kind of context of use and application, it's not going to be one or the other. I think it needs to be somehow fit in progressively in stages throughout the week or throughout the unit of a book, for example.
Sure. So it's all, you know, kind of finding that context, showing the students in context, and these two things go together. Great. So thank you so much for that. On that topic of helping teachers make, you know, sorts of decisions, I want to talk now about supporting the stakeholders that we have with academic English programs. So from your perspective, is there anything that you hear from teachers that they want, you know, out of an academic English program? What are they saying they need or they want?
I think curriculum with clear outcomes and objectives and milestones that measure the development of their students throughout the course. And I think key is that support for delivering the course and delivering those outcomes for the students as appropriate. Support doesn't mean here are a bunch of lesson plans. Support can simply just mean a network of teachers to share ideas or people to ask if they're not sure. It doesn't have to be deliver this lesson plan. I think we need to trust our expertise of our teachers to deliver a course to deliver the content of a course how they see fit. But yeah, just being there and making sure there's clear milestones for them to assess their student needs. And as I mentioned before, giving them the time to get to know their students and to meet their needs as these emerge throughout a course is really important as well.
Excellent. Yeah, so I definitely like that hearing about supporting the milestones. We should be here, or this is what we need to aim for, rather than wait till the end and say, oh, I guess I didn't make it. Right. Okay. And my question now for Laura, when you talk to teachers and schools and administrators around the world, do you hear these same things, or is there anything else that you're hearing from teachers about what they want from an academic English course?
Well, in my most recent school visits, really what I've been hearing, and this is a product of post-COVID, I think, is they want ease of delivery of the digital content. So just because it's so many programs have had to go to a blended model, or when they were doing virtual classes, but really being able to access content easily and to incorporate it into their learning management system has been the most important thing. That has nothing to do with academic English, but just any English. In terms of academic programs, I think it depends. It really often depends on the region. In the United States, they're looking for a little bit more rigor. They want longer passages, reading passages. They want longer lectures. In the Middle East, they want more focus on reading and writing, because the reading and writing skills are usually weaker than the oral skills in the Middle East. And, in Asia, I would say it's sort of a blend, but maybe more focused on the listening and speaking skills in Asia. I think, as you mentioned, Andy, you alluded to, I believe teachers really need help with how to teach these softer skills, like critical thinking, and the skills that we know now are communication skills that are so important in today's world. And, rather than focusing so much on specific academic skills, that we need to be building better rounded individuals, and that teachers do need help with, I think. So we're constantly looking for ways to improve our teacher support materials, whether they're in print or digital, and giving teachers the resources they need to be confident in the classroom with what they have to deliver.
Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective of what's happening around the world with teachers of academic English, and of course for teachers of academic English in Vietnam. One last question I want to touch on is one of the other stakeholders. I know we haven't maybe talked about everyone, but for the course administrators, deans, principals, Ed, it sounds like you have been very successful. Your program has been very successful at helping students achieve things academically in English. So, what advice would you give to deans or principals or school leaders who maybe are considering moving from a general English program to an academic English program? What can they do to set themselves up for success?
I think above all, I think it would be listen to what your teachers are saying. I think they're the ones who are delivering courses in the classrooms and who are having to sort of follow through on the decisions made by these higher level managers. And so if you're going to make these big decisions, just make sure they consult with their teachers to find out what the realities are in the classroom. And I think, things like, for example, building in time for things like extensive reading so students can build their fluency. Don't just make it all about, language input and grammar. Make some time if possible, make some time for additional, not quite extracurricular elements, but kind of outside of the course book, things like that develop core skills such as reading fluency, listening fluency. And yeah, just listening to the teachers, I think, is going to be the most important thing to help them develop a course that meets the needs of the students in the classroom.
That's really solid advice. I definitely agree with that. Thank you. And then my last question is related for Laura. You know, you've probably worked with a lot of schools or programs around the world. What have you noticed that has helped them be successful with some of the schools you've worked with?
Well, I think administrators of larger school districts, they want to see, they really want to see metrics. They want to see, sort of efficacy of the materials. Are the students in our program, are they performing? Are they meeting the objectives? As Ed mentioned, setting clear curricular objectives is super important. And then being able to give the administrators ways to measure the performance of their students and to see that, to show the stakeholders, the parents, or that the students are actually meeting the objectives, the stated objectives of the program. So the metrics are really important, and we are working diligently to be able to provide that for administrators and teachers as well. Do my students, here's the learning objective. How many students are meeting this objective? How many are not? Where are they struggling? Where can we add remediation, kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. All right, so lots of information for administrators to work with as well.
Exactly, data, yeah.
Data. And data not only from numbers, but then soft qualitative data from the teachers and saying
the teachers, yes, yeah.
What's important and what's important to teachers, what's important to students, on top of just numbers and things like that. So thank you so much for our two guests here. I'll remind the audience that if you have any questions, we have just a few minutes left. We might have time for one or two questions if anyone wants to quickly put one in the chat box. In the meantime, I just want to kind of wrap up and summarize what our two guests have shared with us. So we began by talking about academic English and its importance, and they shared with us some success stories, not only of their students, but from their own lives. And we've came to the conclusion that academic English supports students in school, outside of the English classroom, and in other classes as well. And then, of course, we provide a foundation for a lot of skills that will be used later in life. We talked about teaching academic English, and I think my main takeaway from that was about how the content needs to be relevant to students and not so over the top that it's difficult to engage with. And most of all, that it should be contextualized, because we need to use language in context, so we can't focus on only grammar, but we do need to focus on how that grammar and that language is used for academic purposes. And finally, when it comes to supporting stakeholders, I love that key message of listening to the teachers, because they're the ones listening to the students, and the kind of information that we can provide to course administrators and deans and principals is very important to them, and serves to it helps to look at that together with the information that we get from teachers. Great, so thanks so much. Let me just share something really quick. Okay. Just as a quick reminder, we do have some academic English programs. Of course, we are talking about lots of different, academic English in general. We do have academic English programs that if you could explore if you like to by scanning this QR code. I'll give you a minute to think about that. And yeah, I think that's great. Let me just check the box here if we have any things. Okay, I just want to look here at what Juan has said. Our 21st century learners nowadays really want to know the why of learning. And the question is that they often ask, what's the importance of this to my future when I try to land a job? And the answer to this question must be clear to all teachers. So I agree with that. And I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of our guests, but they have said, they used skills from their past in their future now. So if teachers can kind of see, how is this skill used in my own life when I open up the book and see here's a skill. Am I using that in my own life? And that would be a really clear and straightforward way for to help a student see how that skill is going to be useful for them as well. I'm sure that's not the only answer that we have, but I think we're running out of time. So I want to give a huge thank you to our two guests again. We have, again, Ed Brown, Curriculum Coordinator from RMIT, joining us and sharing his experience teaching academic English and working as a course coordinator. And of course, our Executive Editor based in Boston, Laura Le Dréan, who has talked about her experience developing academic English courses. So thank you for joining us again. And
thank you, Andy.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
And if you want to keep up with our events, you can follow us on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/NGLearningVN. That's National Geographic Learning Vietnam. You'll see all of the events that we do and all of the webinars that we do. So please join me in giving a huge round of applause and thank you to our two guests. And for the rest of us who have things and classes to teach, I hope you have a wonderful evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Laura. Nice
Bye.
talking
Thank
with
you
you.
very much. Yes. Take care, everybody.